The night was bitter cold, the kind of cold that cut through even the thickest of coats. Snow had been falling all day, covering the mountain roads in white silence. The wind howled between the trees, and the ground cracked under every step. A young girl was walking alone on the narrow path, her shoes barely enough to keep the freezing snow from biting her toes. She pulled her thin scarf tighter around her neck and tried to move quickly before the storm grew worse. She was used to walking these roads. Her small home stood on the other side of the mountain slope, far from the busy town where she had spent the day doing little chores for a few coins. She had no choice but to go back this way, even if the night was cruel. The snow was heavy, but her heart was steady. She kept reminding herself that if she could reach home, she could rest, sit near the weak fire, and drink warm water before sleeping. As she walked, she noticed something unusual in the distance. At first, she thought it was just a pile of snow shaped oddly by the wind. But as she got closer, her eyes widened. A figure was lying on the ground, half covered in snow, not moving. She froze for a moment, fear tightening her chest. Was it safe to go closer? What if it was someone dangerous? But then the thought came, no one could pretend to be frozen in weather like this. Whoever it was, they were in real trouble. Her heart won over her fear. She rushed forward, her breath sharp and heavy in the cold air. The man's face was pale, his lips almost blue. His coat looked expensive, but it was soaked, and his gloves were missing. She bent down and shook his shoulder gently. "Can you hear me?" she whispered, but only a faint groan escaped his lips. His eyes fluttered, then closed again. He was alive, but barely. The girl looked around. The road was empty, the forest silent, and there was no one else who could help. She knew if she left him there, he would not survive the night. With trembling hands, she tried to pull him up. He was much heavier than she expected, and her thin arms strained with the effort, but she refused to give up. Step by step, she dragged him across the snow toward a small abandoned shelter she remembered nearby. It was an old wooden hut once used by hunters, now broken and forgotten. Still, it could block the wind and give them a chance. Every step felt endless. Her breath came out in clouds, and her body shook from exhaustion. But she kept going, whispering to herself that she could not let someone die in front of her. Finally, with one last pull, she reached the hut. She pushed the broken door open with her shoulder and dragged him inside. The air was still cold, but at least the wind no longer whipped through. Inside, the darkness smelled of wood and damp earth. She placed the man on the floor and quickly gathered small sticks from a corner. She knew how to light a fire. Her life had taught her such skills early. She struck a few stones together until sparks caught the dry bark. Slowly, a weak flame grew into a little fire. The orange glow filled the hut, and a bit of warmth returned to the air. She pulled her own thin shawl from her shoulders and wrapped it around the man. He was still shivering, his breathing shallow. She sat beside him, rubbing his hands between her own to bring warmth. For a moment, she looked at him closely. His shoes, though covered in snow, were fine leather. His coat was made of rich fabric. He did not look like a poor traveler. What was someone like him doing here, on a lonely mountain road in the middle of the night? Questions swirled in her mind, but she pushed them away. Right now, none of that mattered. He needed warmth, food, and someone to stay near. She opened the small cloth bag she carried and pulled out a piece of bread she had saved for her own dinner. Breaking it in half, she held a piece near his lips. At first he didn't move, but slowly he opened his mouth and chewed weakly. It was only a little, but it was enough to keep him awake. The girl leaned against the wooden wall, exhausted but alert. Outside, the storm continued to rage, snow pounding against the old hut. But inside the fire flickered, fighting back the dark. She kept glancing at the stranger, making sure his chest rose and fell. Every time his breathing slowed, her heart skipped in fear. She whispered softly, telling him he would be fine, that morning would come soon. She didn't even know if he could hear her, but speaking gave her courage. Time passed slowly. Her fingers were numb, her body tired, but she didn't close her eyes. She knew if she slept, the fire might die and he would not make it. She fed the flames with every bit of stick she could find, even breaking off parts of broken furniture to keep the heat alive. Her mind drifted between hope and fear. She had never met him before, didn't even know his name. Yet she was fighting the storm for him as if he were family. In that lonely hut, with the firelight dancing on their faces. She did not know she was saving someone whose world was far bigger than hers. She only knew that she could not let a fellow human die in the snow. And that single decision, born of kindness, would soon change everything she thought she knew about her life. The storm outside did not calm through the night. Snow kept falling, pressing against the small hut, and the wind whistled like a warning from the mountain itself. Inside, the fire burned low but steady. The young girl sat close to the stranger, watching his chest rise and fall. She knew he was weak but alive. His face had regained a little color since she had brought him in, though his hands were still ice cold. When the faint light of morning finally touched the sky, the girl felt relief. She had survived the night, and so had he. But her relief did not last long. As the stranger stirred, his voice cracked and weak, she realized how fragile he still was. He tried to sit up, but his body shook, and he leaned back down, breathing heavily. She quickly placed her hand on his shoulder and told him softly not to move too much. She offered him more of the small bread she had saved. At first he refused, shaking his head faintly, but she insisted, breaking it into small pieces and giving it to him little by little. He ate slowly, as though every bite took great effort. Then, with trembling hands, he reached for the cup she had filled with melted snow warmed by the fire. He drank carefully, his lips still pale. After a long pause, he whispered a soft thank you. The girl smiled faintly. She wasn't used to hearing those words often, and for a moment, they warmed her more than the fire itself. She asked him if he was traveling with someone, if his family was nearby, but he didn't answer. His tired eyes only looked into the flames, as though searching for strength there. She studied him quietly. His clothes were unlike anything she had ever owned. The stitching was neat, the fabric thick, the shoes finely made. Even with dirt and snow covering them, they spoke of someone who had wealth or importance. She wondered how such a man had ended up alone in the snow, nearly frozen to death. But she didn't push for answers. She had learned that sometimes people carry burdens they don't want to speak of, and maybe he was one of them. The hours passed slowly. She busied herself by keeping the fire alive, collecting scraps of broken wood from the corners of the hut, and melting more snow to drink. She rubbed his hands to keep the blood moving. Even though her own fingers were stiff and red from the cold. At one point, he opened his eyes again and looked directly at her. His voice was weak but clear enough to ask, "Why did you help me?" She paused, not expecting the question. After a moment, she answered in her plain, honest way. "Because you were there, and you needed help. I couldn't leave you." He studied her face as though trying to understand her. "Even though you don't know me?" She nodded. "Everyone needs someone sometimes. If I was in the snow, I would hope someone would help me too." Her words lingered in the silence. He closed his eyes again, and she could see a faint smile on his lips. She didn't know why, but it felt as if her answer had touched him more deeply than she could guess. As the day went on, he grew a little stronger. He managed to sit up for a while, leaning against the wooden wall. She placed the shawl around his shoulders again and urged him not to strain himself. He whispered her name back to her after she mentioned it, repeating it slowly as if he wanted to remember it. She didn't realize then how important that small moment would become. When evening came, the storm outside began to soften. Through the cracks of the hut, she could see the snow finally easing, the sky clearing to reveal pale light. The man looked at her and whispered, "You saved me. I won't forget." She shook her head and told him there was no need to repay her, that helping was enough. To her, it was just something a human being should do for another. She did not know that the man's silence was not from weakness alone. He was holding back who he really was. That night, as the fire burned low and shadows flickered on the wooden walls, the girl leaned against the door, keeping watch while the stranger slept. Her body was tired, her stomach empty, but her spirit was steady. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew she had kept someone alive through one of the harshest nights of winter. What she did not realize was that this man she had saved was no ordinary traveler. His life stretched far beyond these snowy mountains, and his world was nothing like hers. For now, he was just a weak stranger in her care. But soon, the truth would step into the light, and her act of kindness would echo far beyond anything she had ever imagined. The next morning came slowly, the sky painted in pale gray as light pushed away the shadows of the storm. The snow had softened outside, no longer raging as it had the night before. Inside the hut, the fire had burned low, but its faint warmth still lingered. The girl stirred from her light sleep, her head resting against the wooden wall. Her body ached from the long hours of watching over the stranger, but her spirit was calm. She had done what she could, and now it was in the hands of fate. The man she had saved opened his eyes, blinking against the dim light. For the first time, he looked more awake, though his face was still pale. The girl moved closer, offering him a small smile. She handed him the last piece of bread she had saved, breaking it into smaller bites so it would be easier for him to eat. He took it carefully, his hands still trembling. Each bite seemed to bring a little more life back to him. She melted more snow in the tin cup and passed it to him. He drank slowly, then leaned back against the wall, his breath steadier than before. For a while, there was silence between them. Only the crackle of the fire and the occasional whistle of the wind filled the air. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but stronger than the day before. "You should have left me. It was too dangerous for you." The girl shook her head, her eyes steady. "If I had left you, you wouldn't be here now." Sometimes danger doesn't matter when someone's life is at risk. He studied her for a long moment. There was no pride in her voice, no sign that she thought she had done something extraordinary. She spoke as though it was the most natural choice in the world. That truth unsettled him. In his life, he had met many people who only helped when they could gain something in return. Yet here was someone with nothing, giving everything she had without asking for a single thing back. He asked her name again, and this time he repeated it softly, as if trying to commit it to memory. The sound of it seemed to comfort him, though she did not understand why. He wanted to ask more where she lived, why she was out in the storm, but he kept his questions inside. Instead, he only said, "I owe you more than I can explain." The girl smiled faintly and shook her head. "You don't owe me. I just did what anyone should do." Her answer left him silent. He stared at the flames, deep in thought. As the day grew brighter, the man managed to stand with her help. His legs were weak, and he leaned heavily against the wall, but he could move. She supported him, guiding him to sit again before he collapsed from exhaustion. His condition was improving, but he was not yet ready to travel far. She wondered if she should go into town to look for help, but she feared leaving him alone. He must have sensed her worry because he placed a weak hand on her arm and whispered, "Don't go. Stay." She nodded quietly. And so she stayed. Hours passed, and with them came small conversations. He told her very little about himself, only that he had been traveling and his car had broken down on the mountain road. He avoided details, speaking only what was necessary. She didn't press him for more. Instead, she talked about small things, how harsh winters could be in the mountains, how people in her village worked hard just to survive each season, how sometimes the snow felt endless. Her voice was gentle, her words simple, but there was a quiet strength in the way she spoke. The stranger listened carefully, his eyes never leaving her face. For the first time in years, he felt as though someone was speaking without expectation, without hidden motives. Her honesty was unfamiliar but comforting. By evening, the man seemed stronger. He looked at her directly and said, "You've given me more than warmth and food. You've given me hope. I don't know how I will ever repay you, but I will try." She smiled again, shaking her head as if the idea of repayment was unnecessary. "Repayment isn't why I helped. If I can go home tonight knowing you'll live, that's enough." He said nothing more, but inside something shifted. He understood that this girl had saved not just his body from the cold, but a part of his spirit he thought had long been frozen. That night, as the fire crackled again and shadows danced on the wooden walls, the girl leaned back, tired but satisfied. She believed this chapter would close soon, that once he was strong enough, he would leave, and she would return to her simple life. She didn't know that he was already making a silent promise in his heart, a promise that her kindness would never be forgotten. For now, though, she remained unaware of who he truly was. To her, he was just a stranger saved from the snow. To him, she was the light that had appeared in his darkest moment. Their lives were tied together now, though she could not yet see where this road would lead. The girl thought she would never see this stranger again. After he had regained enough strength, she guided him slowly down the safer path of the mountain. He leaned heavily on her arm, but he walked, one step at a time, until they reached a point where the road widened. There, he told her he could manage on his own. He looked into her eyes, as though wanting to say more, but instead he only thanked her again, quietly, before walking away. She watched him disappear into the snow, believing their paths had crossed for the last time. That evening, she returned to her small home, tired and hungry, but content. She had done what was right, and that thought gave her peace. She sat near the weak fire in her little room, chewing on a simple meal of bread and boiled water. Her life went on as it always had, modest, quiet, with little to call her own. She never once imagined that her world was about to change. The next day, as the sun dipped low and painted the snow in shades of gold, the sound of something unusual reached her ears. At first, she thought it was thunder rolling in from the mountains. But as it grew louder, she realized it was not thunder at all. It was the deep hum of engines. She stepped outside, pulling her shawl tightly around her shoulders, and froze at the sight before her, a large black SUV, shining even under layers of snow, slowly made its way up the narrow path to her house. Behind it, another followed, just as polished, just as strange in her humble village. Never before had she seen such vehicles here. The neighbors peeked out from their doors, whispering among themselves, their eyes wide with curiosity. The girl's heart pounded in her chest. Who could it be? The SUV stopped in front of her small wooden home. The door opened, and men in fine suits stepped out, their coats thick, their shoes spotless. They looked around, as if guarding something or someone important. Then, another door opened, and out stepped the stranger she had saved. Only now, he didn't look like the weak, shivering man she had dragged from the snow. He stood tall, his coat pressed neatly, his hair combed, his steps sure and confident. The air around him carried a weight she couldn't describe, a presence that made everyone turn their heads, her breath caught in her throat. She stared, unable to believe her eyes. Was this the same man she had wrapped in her thin shawl? The same man who had whispered weak thanks by the fire? He walked toward her with calm steps, his eyes never leaving hers. For a moment, the world seemed to blur around them, the chatter of neighbors fading into silence. When he reached her door, he stopped and smiled softly. "Do you remember me?" he asked, though his tone already carried the answer. Her voice trembled as she replied, "Of course I do. How could I forget?" The men behind him lowered their heads slightly, waiting for his word. She noticed how they treated him with respect, almost like he was someone untouchable. That was when it struck her. He wasn't just a traveler. He wasn't just anyone. He took a step closer. I didn't tell you before who I was. I couldn't, but I want you to know now. The girl swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her shawl. Her heart raced, unsure of what she was about to hear. I'm not just a man lost in the snow, he continued quietly. I'm the head of a company. Some call it fortune, some call it power, but most simply call it wealth. I am a billionaire. The word felt heavy in the air, almost unreal against the backdrop of her small home. She blinked, stunned, her mind struggling to connect the weak stranger she had saved with the man standing before her now. A billionaire? She had never even seen such people except in newspapers or stories whispered in town. And yet here he was, speaking to her with warmth in his voice. You saved my life, he said firmly, his eyes steady on hers. And because of you, I stand here today. I came back, not just to thank you again, but to make sure you understand what your kindness means to me. She shook her head quickly, still overwhelmed. I didn't do it for thanks. I didn't do it for anything. I only did what I thought was right. He smiled again, softer this time. And that is exactly why it means so much. The neighbors whispered louder now, pointing at the luxury cars, at the men in suits, at the girl who stood frozen at her doorway. To them, it was like a scene from a dream, a poor girl being visited by someone whose life seemed worlds away from theirs. For the girl, it was even more unreal. She felt as if she was standing in two worlds at once, the small, struggling life she had always known, and this new, overwhelming presence that had suddenly appeared at her door. She didn't yet know what this moment would lead to. She didn't know how much her life was about to change. All she knew was that the stranger she had saved was no longer just a stranger. He was someone with power, with means beyond anything she had imagined. And he had come back for her. The girl's heart still raced as she stood at her door, staring at the man who had once been helpless in the snow. Now he was surrounded by men in suits and cars she had only seen from afar, declaring a truth that felt impossible to believe. A billionaire. The word echoed in her mind, but she could not make sense of it. To her, he had been only a weak man fighting for life, someone she had helped because she could not bear to walk away. The stranger, no, the billionaire, took a slow step closer. His voice was calm, but there was weight in every word. You saved me when I had nothing to give. You risked your own safety in a storm for someone you didn't even know. That is something I will never forget. The neighbors lingered nearby, whispering and watching, but she barely heard them. Her breath trembled and her fingers gripped her shawl tightly. She shook her head, speaking quietly. I didn't save you for this. I didn't do it expecting anything. I only wanted you to live. He looked at her with something deeper than gratitude in his eyes. And that is exactly why your kindness has changed me. I came back because I cannot let you remain unseen. You gave me a second chance, and now I want to give you one too. She blinked, confused. What do you mean? He gestured to the cars and the men behind him. I have resources. I have wealth. But none of it would matter if I had been left in the snow that night. You gave me life. Now I want to give you the life you deserve. The words felt heavy, almost unreal. She thought of her small wooden home, the night she had gone to bed hungry, the morning she had walked miles for a little work. Could all of that change in an instant? She shook her head again, almost afraid to believe. I don't need riches. I only need enough to live, nothing more. His expression softened. This is not about riches. It is about dignity. It is about giving you the chance to live without fear of the next meal, without the weight of endless struggle. Let me do this for you. Not as a payment, as a promise. Her lips parted, but no words came. She felt tears press at the corners of her eyes, not from greed or desire, but from the overwhelming kindness of being seen, of being valued. For so long, she had lived quietly, almost invisible to the world. And now, this man she had once saved was offering to lift her into a life she had never even dared to dream of. Days later, the promise became real. Workers arrived at her home, rebuilding it into a warm, strong house where the cold could no longer seep through the walls. For the first time, she slept under a roof that did not leak, on a bed that was soft, with blankets thick enough to fight the harshest winter nights. Her family, who had long lived with hardship, saw their lives transform as well. The billionaire made sure they had food, clothes, and security. But more than material things, he gave her something far greater: opportunity. He arranged for her education, books, and teachers who could guide her toward the future she deserved. He told her that kindness like hers deserved to be matched with knowledge and power, so she could build her own path in the world. Every time she tried to thank him, he stopped her gently. "You don't need to thank me," he would say. "I am the one who owes you everything." The people in the village spoke about her differently now. Once, she was just a poor girl who walked miles in the snow. Now she was the girl who saved a man's life, the girl whose kindness had brought miracles to her door. They whispered about the billionaire, about the cars and the suits. But the truth that spread the fastest was her simple act. She had helped when no one else was there, and though her life changed in ways she could never have imagined, her heart stayed the same. She remained humble, gentle, and grateful. The world around her grew brighter, but she still believed the most powerful thing she had ever done was the choice to kneel in the snow and save a stranger. As for the billionaire, he visited often, not with grand speeches or heavy gifts, but with quiet respect and a friendship that grew with each passing day. To him, she was not just the girl who saved him, she was the reminder that humanity, even in its simplest form, was more valuable than all the wealth he owned. The girl, who once had nothing but a thin shawl and a kind heart, had unknowingly written the story of her own destiny. She had saved a life in the snow, unaware that the man she carried to safety was someone who's known across cities and nations. But in the end, it wasn't his wealth that mattered. It was the bond formed in that cold night. A bond built not on money or power, but on kindness, humanity, and courage. And so her life was forever changed, not just by the gifts she received, but by the truth she carried, that one act of compassion, no matter how small it seems, has the power to open doors the heart never thought possible.